As they say, many, many years ago, in a kingdom of Germany, lived a generous and brave monarch who owned a huge castle surrounded by lush forests and abundant game. The king was absent from the palace for a long time, either in battles chasing enemies or on political trips to other kingdoms with which he negotiated. He had no offspring, and this tormented him a lot, and his wife the queen, who begged over and over again to have children to cheer her up with his adventures and games. One winter afternoon the queen was walking through the palace gardens, and she was surprised to see that her rose bush had bloomed, and she had a wonderful rose there, defying the cold and snow. She immediately wanted to cut it with her own hands, but we already know that roses have thorns, and the queen hurt herself with them when she wanted to cut the rose. The drops of blood fell to the snowy ground, and the queen felt that all this that was happening was a message. She asked to become pregnant with a girl as white as that snow and with red lips like that blood that adorned her. She effectively became the queen pregnant with her, and when she was born the girl was named Snow White. Snow White's birth filled the kingdom with joy. However, the joy did not last long, because the queen died a few months after giving birth to Snow White, plunging the king into a deep sadness and melancholy, and for this reason he went out on hunting parties, and visited neighboring kingdoms to negotiate with them and thus spend away from the palace for long periods. On one of those trips he met a beautiful lady who fell in love with him deeply and ended up marrying her and taking her to her kingdom. He brought that lady with him a huge mirror made with sand from the Spanish eastern lands, which gave it a spectacular reflection, something strange in those days when mirrors were not as good as they are today. She had the mirror installed in a special room that lacked furniture, and the new queen visited that room every morning and spent a good time there. She was heard talking and laughing while she was in the room. She would then come out all happy and smiling. Rumors among the servants about what could happen in those strange visits that the queen made every morning to the mirror room. Some said if she wasn't a little crazy. Others said that she might pray aloud. Others didn't know what to say and just listened to the comments. The truth is that the queen stood every morning in front of the mirror and, looking at her face and figure perfectly reflected from her, spoke to the mirror saying, "Mirror, wonderful mirror, tell me who is the most beautiful woman in this kingdom?" Anyone who is right in the head does not even think of talking to a mirror, asking something, much less thinking that they will have an answer. But in the case of the queen something surprising happened. The mirror was bewitched, and I answered your question. You, my queen, are the most beautiful woman in this kingdom, and of all those that surround it, there is no beauty equal to yours. It must be said at this point that the queen was obsessed with beauty, and particularly with her beauty. She had potions, creams, various drinks to maintain her figure, remove any hint of gray hair from her hair, and at the slightest wrinkle she immediately ran terrified to the house of her image consultants so that they would indicate this or that remedy. She slept with her head wrapped in a stocking that stretched the skin on her face. She smeared herself profusely with creams from different plants to keep her beauty smooth and smooth. She bathed with different essences and did any number of exercises so that not a drop of fat accumulate in your body. Apart from those daily chores, the queen had sadly entered the world of magic, and as she entered that world, she became a fearsome sorceress and visited stalls of people who practiced dark and gloomy magic, all with the sole purpose of continuing always beautiful and beautiful. It was on one of those visits that she found the wonderful mirror that she had brought to the palace. She cost him a fortune, but she had been worth the purchase, because the mirror was enchanted and an evil sorcerer had locked a genie inside the mirror who had to tell the truth to those who asked him something. Faced with such a scenario, the king stayed away from his kingdom much more often than before, leaving matters in the hands of his ministers and sadly leaving Snow White more alone than one. In this mischief the years went by, and the king continued with his absences. The queen continued with her daily visits to the mirror room, and Snow White grew up without the slightest supervision from her stepmother, who literally did not give a damn what happened to her stepdaughter. Everyone in the palace wondered what was happening with the queen, because everyone got old, everyone got sick, everyone they worsened at court except for her, who remained fresh and luxuriant as the first day her feet set foot on those royal grounds. Since the king stayed away for so long, she commanded and ordered everything in the castle. She did not interfere in state affairs, but she did give orders left and right regarding court life. One of the requirements was that any woman who worked in the palace could not rival her in beauty, so the queen herself was in charge of carefully choosing the women that she had there serving, whether they were cooks, guards, cleaners or ministers. When they needed some staff in the palace, they were made to line up, and the one with the longest nose, or the one with the most shabby hair, or if she was one-eyed, or had any physical defect, was chosen for this or that position. So among the villagers they were already called the Castle of the Ugly. Of course, in these trivial worries, The queen did not notice that her stepdaughter grew up and she became a 16-year-old woman with snow-white skin and blood-red lips. Among the peasants and artisans a legend circulated about the queen, her beauty, and her strange ways of life. They all feared her and talked about her eternal youth and ways to achieve this strange phenomenon. Everyone knew that as soon as one of them had a daughter of a certain beauty, when she reached a certain age, that girl would mysteriously disappear and no one would ever hear from her again. Any number of rumors circulated about the missing girls, and the villagers in view of such an event made their daughters ugly, either by neglecting them until they could not, that is, with their uncombed hair, smudged with charcoal to hide their features, or when not there was a way to hide their beauty by sending them away from those lands. A sad day for everyone. The queen woke up as happy as ever, and after rubbing her face well to remove the beauty ointments she had put on to sleep, she approached the mirror room as every morning. Standing in front of the mirror, she asked him the same routine as always. "Mirror, wonderful mirror, tell me who is the most beautiful woman in this kingdom?" And as always the mirror replied, "You, my queen, are the most beautiful woman in this kingdom, and of all those that surround it, there is no beauty equal to yours." However, that fateful day, the mirror added to her usual response, "But you have to know, that there is a girl who grows with more beauty than you, my queen, with skin white as snow and lips red as blood, and her beauty will soon surpass yours." The queen's eyes widened furiously. She left the room and immediately called the guards who served her faithfully. "Search among the people of the town for that girl with skin white as snow and lips red as her blood, and you already know what to do with her." The henchmen went out to visit towns and villages but did not find anyone with such qualities. They only found weak, gangly, disheveled girls, and ugly as could be. On their return they informed the queen of her inquiries. The queen, however, was very suspicious. The mirror never lied. Distrustful of the announcement in the mirror, she went to visit a sorcerer whom she consulted for remedies and potions because she wanted to see with her own eyes the faces of her subjects and her daughters to verify the announcement that the genius I had given him. The sorcerer gave her a drink of a disgusting color and no less repulsive appearance that she drank upon reaching the palace, and in terrible pain because it cracked her bones, twisted and contorted, transforming her into a horrible old woman, with a great hump, a long and full nose, warts and long, bony hands. The queen looked at herself in the mirror and smiling, she left the palace through a secret door and walked the roads looking for some beauty among the people of her town. She found nothing resembling a pretty woman all the way from her. Only poorly dressed people, filthy children, and fat, gangly women. Satisfied with her mission, she returned to the castle, and taking the other concoction that the sorcerer had prepared for her, she returned through many pains to her true physiognomy. It took her a few days to recover from the twisting and stretching to which she had subjected her body. She did not want to reflect in her mirror because she remembered the horrible figure of the old woman, and this tormented her greatly. After some time, she returned to the mirror room and she again asked her question. "Mirror, wonderful mirror, tell me who is the most beautiful woman in this kingdom?" And the mirror again gave him the answer. "You, my queen, you are the most beautiful woman in this kingdom, and of all those that surround it, there is no beauty equal to yours. But you have to know, that there is a girl who grows up with more beauty than you, my queen, with white skin like snow and blood-red lips, and her beauty will soon surpass yours." "Hui!" the queen yelled, "you are lying, cursed mirror. I have sent my soldiers and they have not found anyone of a similar description. I myself have gone out in search of them and I have not found anything but stinky, disheveled and ragged people." "You know I can't lie," the mirror replied. "How is it possible then what you are telling me?" The queen yelled at him angrily, "Who is it? Where is she? What her name? Tell me," she yelled at him. "Her name is Snow White," the mirror answered her. "Her skin is as white as snow and her lips red as the purest blood. She grows beautifully and she is more beautiful than you." The queen was stunned. Snow White, what did that name of hers sound like to her? Where had she heard it before? She suddenly remembered her stepdaughter whom she had not seen since her arrival at the palace. "Snow White?" she said. That brat, that wacky barely 2 feet tall? How old is that jerk now?" She stormed out of the mirror room and called her servants. "Where is Snow White? What is it about that ungrateful woman who never comes to visit me? Bring her to me right now and have her appear before me." Soon Snow White appeared. The queen turned pale with envy when she saw her. She really was a beautiful girl, with smooth white skin, jet black hair, caramel eyes, and a sweet and delicate face. "You sent me to call my queen," Snow White said with a soft and rather fearful voice. The queen, changing her countenance, smiled sweetly. Of course, my daughter, so much time in the castle, so many household chores, so many obligations had prevented me from taking care of you. Come sit next to me, let's be friends, tell me your plans, tell me how you live in palace, do they treat you well? Are you comfortable? Snow White, stunned, approached the queen and sat next to her. Yes, of course, this is my house, your majesty, I live in some rooms, cared for by my governesses since I was little, they teach me, take care of me. Well, ow, oh. I hate them, they are all annoying, bossy and scolding. While she spoke she watched her stepdaughter and envy grew in her heart at times. Snow White was much more beautiful than her and without the need for her creams, concoctions and exercises. But, answered Snow White, they treat me well ma'am, we play, we have fun, they teach me Greek, Latin, prayers, they are really kind. Of course, games, the queen told her, but a girl like you has to feel alone. She locked up there with 4 fat old women, watching days and nights go by bored with her hearty and pusillanimous conversations. The girl did not know what to answer. That conversation with her stepmother had overwhelmed her. She had never had the slightest contact with her father's wife since she arrived at the palace. She had never called her and she had never been even slightly interested in her. What was the reason for such sudden interest in his life and his habits? How is it possible, the queen continued speaking, that you have grown behind my back, here in the castle, and have become such a beautiful woman? Imagine, you here and me, searching the villages and hamlets getting muddy, stepping on cow droppings and talking to filthy and scruffy pestilential villagers. Snow White looked at her surprised at such a conversation. Oh dear, I bore you with my conversation, now go away, and keep playing with your maids, keep growing so beautiful, she told him sadly, and we'll see what we do with you. The girl looked at her scared. Oh, please, don't make that scared face, I mean dear, that you will have to organize a party, a dance, a big dinner, something must be organized for you. How old do you say you are? I am going to turn 16, your majesty. 16, what a magnificent age, when beauty awakens in a woman's body. Imagine Blanquita, if you're so beautiful now that you won't be soon. All the princes will be fluttering around this palace pretending to you and seeking to marry you. Yes, if you say so. Of course I say it my daughter, go now, I'm tired, I need to rest and see what I do with you. Snow White left her stepmother's presence very worried because she had also heard the rumors about the queen's habits, her beauty rites and the visits that the servants made to wizards, witches, and sorcerers, but at the same time she was excited a lot with the lady's words, a party, a dance, perhaps the rumors were just that, rumors, and she really wanted to make up for lost time and wanted to be her friend and revive life in the palace. Once the queen saw Snow White leave her presence, she changed her sweet face to one of anger and rage. She stormed out of the room and headed towards the courtyard where her soldiery was training. She looked around her but she thought that she might be very conspicuous if she sent his guards for what he had foreseen in his disturbed mind. So he promptly changing his mind he headed for the castle kitchens. The cooks, maids, washermen and women, dishwashers, and servants in general were stunned to see her appear there among the stoves and pots, coals and piles of food waiting for her to cook. Who commands here? She said defiantly. Come on, answer quickly you wimps. What do you mean ma'am? She managed to say, a robust woman. Let's not waste any more time, said the queen dryly. I want you to send the best hunter in the palace to my meeting room as soon as you see him, and saying this, she left there leaving everyone behind in the kitchen with a shocked face. The queen waited in her room for the man to come and when she came she began to chat with him. Are you the best palace hunter? So say my lady. You have a family, sons, daughters, a wife, come on, speak quickly, I don't have time to waste. 2 majesty daughters. Bring them before me, they will be my lackeys from today, they will help me in whatever I can think of. The hunter, fearing for the life of her daughters, looked at her scared, but, my lady, my daughters are clumsy, careless, they hardly know how to cook or ride a horse, they don't even have a good conversation, they are real idiots. It doesn't matter, hunter, I don't want them to serve me, but so that they can be a bargaining chip for a job that I want to propose to you. If you don't fulfill my mission, your daughters will pay with their lives. I warn you that whoever deceives me pays dearly for his audacity. And what if the hunter was scared by such a threat? Please, the man began to speak, Your Majesty, what have we done to you? I serve you faithfully, I fulfill my mission in the best possible way. Shut up, the queen interrupted him. I don't want your finicky whining. What I have to ask of you is very easy to fulfill, only that to know that you will fulfill my wish I will remain a pledge to your daughters and come on, I'm not what those gossips paint me about. The mob, I will release your daughters as soon as you do my job, simple as that. I'm listening, my queen, the hunter said passively. As soon as Snow White arrived at the rooms that were reserved for her in the palace so that she could live, she was immediately surrounded by her governesses. What happened? What did that brew, the queen, want? My daughter, you have a bad face, what has she told you? Nothing, His Majesty has really been good to me, he has talked to me about friendship, about throwing me a party, about bringing young princes to dance. Oh, I don't know how to dance, I've never danced, I won't know how to behave in such a situation. The good women who had raised her looked at each other in confusion. Will there be someone in the palace who knows how to dance? Snow White continued speaking, we have never given a party in the castle, and what clothes are worn at a ball? How is the protocol? Can I talk to anyone? Will I have to keep a lot of composure, or maybe at the galas they will give free rein to laugh and enjoy? Daughter, one of them told her, are you sure that's what your stepmother proposed to you? You will not have misunderstood? No, that's what she told me, you have to organize something, a party, a banquet, princes from neighboring kingdoms will come to claim you. The governesses, very confused by Snow White's explanation, could not manage to answer her, but they were suspicious of the queen's kindness. They did not want to take away the illusion of the girl, who had lived lonely and abandoned by everyone for years, there in those rooms, with the only company of her maids and the occasional soldier who watched over her safety. That sudden interest of the stepmother for Snow White, and having heard so many bad things about the queen, made their hair stand on end. The good of Snow White did not understand the bad intentions that her stepmother had planned for her. Within everything she had been kind and affectionate. In her mind, excited about her, she imagined herself in the great hall of the palace, with a gala dress, and some musicians playing something. What would a dance be like? How would the other ladies dress? How would the queen dress? Would her father come to such an event? It had been so long since she knew anything about the king, her father. After a few days, they knocked on the door of Snow White's room and the queen entered with all pomposity. Ah, please, she said with some disgust, is this where you live, little girl? What a disgusting hovel, and you, he said, looking at the maids, don't you know how to ask for that little mouth so that there is something luxurious and elegant? Don't you know that you are taking care of the princess? What horrible curtains are those? Who has chosen this horrible carpet? And those country furniture? I'll take care of you as soon as I have time. Look at keeping my dear husband's daughter in these conditions, but what can be expected from the mob? Out, right now, all of my presents. The women left and the queen then addressed Snow White with great tenderness. Come darling, come with me, let's get out of this pigsty, they are making me dizzy. He took Snow White, hugging her, giving her affection and cuddles on her way. He took her to the gardens. Daughter, she told her, you're very pale, don't those fools take you out for air? No, don't tell me anything, it's not necessary. Look, I'm entrusting this hunter I asked to take you for a long walk around the palace, so that you can get a little rosy and get some fresh air from spring. He is a great hunter, so you do not have to fear the least, because he will protect and guard you with his life. The hunter looked at her and bowed respectfully, which made Snow White confide in her good intentions. She, smiling, gave the queen a kiss and began to walk, followed by the hunter. The queen stared at her, and in her heart she felt a tiny touch of love for the princess, but passing her hand over her cheek she returned to her routine chores. Snow White received the spring air with authentic emotion. She rarely left the palace, she almost never left those rooms that she had been assigned, so that gift from the queen seemed to her a special wonder. She ran happily through the fresh grass, she smelled the wild flowers, she looked at the clouds and received the clean air of the field in her lungs. The hunter looked at her attentively, and from time to time he smiled at her when he saw her so happy and content. He reminded her of her own daughters, however a cloud of pain from her reminded him of the mission of that walk. Arrived at a good distance from the castle, the hunter cornered Snow White against some hedges, and taking out her knife, she looked at her menacingly. Snow White was seized with terror and she began to cry in fear. The hunter made several attempts to stab her, but she could not do that. Her father's heart prevented her from taking the life of that innocent girl. Go away, she yelled at him at one point. Run away from here, run away, where no one can find you. Hide from the queen, she has asked me to kill you and take your heart as proof. Snow White was stunned by such information. "Let you go," the hunter yelled. "Run away before I regret it. Get out of here and never come back." The girl, scared to the point of being unable to, ran until she was exhausted. Entering the depths of the forest, in a small clearing she fell to the ground exhausted, and between tears, pain, and a lot of sadness she fell asleep. The hunter returned to the palace with the heart of a deer that he had killed. He brought it in a chest that the queen had provided him. He presented it to her and then he quickly left the palace, looked for his wife and his daughters and left those lands. Sooner or later the queen could discover the deception and would retaliate. The queen received the chest, opened it, and upon seeing her middle heart, she was saddened, but she soon recovered her usual countenance and returned to her daily routines. He announced the sad news of Snow White's death. Attacked by a wolf on the walk she had invited him to, she pretended to cry, lament, and even put on a black dress for a few days. If before in the palace they were somewhat afraid of him, now everyone's gossip and misgivings were corroborated. No one believed the tale of the wolf. Rumors of the disappearance of the hunter and his family were rumored. In the huddles of servants they grieved for the sad fate of Snow White and claimed that the queen herself had ordered her killed. When Snow White woke up, she felt overwhelmed, sad, alone and abandoned. She remembered the terrible events that had brought her there and she began to cry anguished. What would become of her? Where was she? Where could she go? She got up and began to walk further into the depths of the forest. Passing a small river she found a very neglected country house. Fearful she knocked on the door but no one answered. She pushed the door and entered. At first she thought it would be abandoned, because everything in the house was a colossal mess, dirty and stacked dishes, clothes here and there, dust everywhere, and the kitchen stove as if no one had used it for years. Yet in the pantry she found bread and cheese, freshly picked fruit, and nuts. She then understood that someone had to visit that little house from time to time. She possibly would have gone out to look for food, so she decided to wait and see if whoever lived there would offer her shelter. Let's remember that Snow White was a princess, so she didn't know how to do anything domestic, but she was tidy and clean, so taking a broom she began to sweep the floor. She had seen the maids do it on many occasions. It couldn't be very difficult. She swept as best she could and dusted with the rags she found lying around, when she could least sit on a chair. Near nightfall she opened the door and she, very scared, got up to introduce herself to the owner of the house. They entered, 1, 2, 3, 4, up to 7 little men, more or less fort. They were soft, dirty to a fault, and they all stared at her in astonishment. "Who are you? What are you doing in our home?" Snow White bowed respectfully and shyly introduced herself. "Good afternoon, my name is Snow White. I saw the door open and I went in looking for refuge." She told them her story and they were all moved by what they heard. The little men were miners, from the coal mines that existed in those lands. Every morning they left for the mines and returned at night sooty and full of coal. They hardly had time to do anything other than eat something and go to bed at night. Next morning back to the mine. In this house, one of the little men told her, "You can stay, my daughter, don't be afraid. We live so far away from everything and everyone that I assure you that the queen will not be able to find you if you stay here. Yes, you see how we live. No, you won't have luxuries, nor anyone who can help you. We don't have time to clean, or anything other than work and sleep. That's right, you won't lack coal to heat you," he said, pointing to his friends who were smudged but couldn't, and smiled. Snow White smiled, happy to find affection among those men. She thanked her for her kindness and they all sat down to eat and chatted for a long time. In the palace, meanwhile, life went on as always, routine and boring. The queen had sent emissaries to the king informing him of the tragedy that had occurred with her daughter, and far from bringing him to her domain, she pushed him further away, dying shortly after, alone, sad, and abandoned everything and everyone. With Snow White dead, the queen turned to the mirror day after day to ask the same thing over and over again, and the mirror always answered the same litany. It no longer spoke of Snow White. Apparently the depth of the forest, or perhaps the distance, prevented that the genius knew of its existence. In the little house in the forest, Snow White had found a home and she felt as loved as when she was in the palace with the nurses who had raised and cared for her. The little men treated her like a daughter and took care of her at all times, warning her not to talk to anyone, to go out as little as possible and to stay hidden in case an emissary from the castle came to those places. The people of the castle had never ventured into those lands, but it is safer to be safe than sorry. Several months went by in those days. Snow White tried to be as useful as possible. She had the house at least tidy. There were no more dishes piled up, no clothes here and there. She made a little dabble in the kitchen, but well, Her soups burned. She didn't quite understand how the stove worked, and she filled the house with smoke. She swept that way, but even so she was always happy, and little by little she overcame her culinary failures. The little men, preventing her from making her tasteless stews, brought nuts, seasonal fruits, and little by little they taught her how to make pea soup and how to cook eggs. Little by little, Snow White ventured along the paths. She went out to sunbathe, walked, took long walks through the woods, and picked blackberries or chestnuts if appropriate. One fine day she met some farmers who were going to the fair in the town. Since they had never seen her, they began to chat with her. Snow White knew how to be discreet with her comments, but even so, the peasants, seeing her gestures and delicate forms, immediately understood that she must be someone from a good family. At first they wondered if the men from the mine they would not have kidnapped her and had her imprisoned and threatened, but they soon discarded that opinion because the girl was alive, happy, and smiling. Snow White did not give more meaning to that meeting, but nevertheless, rumors and comments about the beautiful and delicate girl who lived with the miners in the forest house soon began to be heard, and it did not take long for people to spin one thing with another, and soon they began to suspect if it were not Princess Snow White, missing and presumed dead by the queen, and whose body was never found. Somehow the rumors and suspicions were reaching the palace, and the genius of the mirror soon found out that in the little house in the forest living with the miners there was a girl with white skin like snow. When the next morning the queen went to the room and asked the mirror her well-known, little mirror, she was stunned by the answer. Snow White was alive. She had taken refuge in the little house in the woods where the little coal men lived. How was it possible? The hunter had deceived her. Full of anger and fury she left the room and ran to the kitchens asking for the hunter's house, but the answer made her even more enraged than she already was, breaking clay pots and throwing everything on the floor. Whatever was there left the kitchens. She, crying with rage, headed towards her room and hatched a terrible plan. She took several apples and put them in a basket, then he dipped one of the apples in a poison he had made and doused half an apple with it. She drank the concoction that transformed her into an ugly and wrinkled old woman and left through the secret door towards the little house in the woods. She was a long time coming, and when she did she sat weary and dejected on a bench that she had pushed up against the kitchen wall. Snow White was inside her humming a song she had heard since she was a child. When she heard the old woman's gasps she looked out the window. "Oh," said the queen, "I'm sorry, my daughter, if I scared you. I'm going to town to sell my apples and I was so tired that I sat here to catch my breath. I don't want to disturb you, I'm leaving." "Please, madam, stay as long as you like. Have some water. You were singing, little one. What a beautiful melody. Where did you hear it? Who has taught you?" Snow White smiled. "I don't know, I've heard it since I can remember. Sometimes I sing while doing things to entertain myself." "How beautiful you are. Here, I give you one of my apples. Good is rewarded with good. This is for you, dear. It is the juiciest of my apples. I harvest them myself. I assure you that they are the most delicious you will ever taste." "Please, ma'am, go and sell your apples in town. You don't need to reward me. I just gave you some water." "You have done more than that, daughter. You have given me hope of achieving my wishes. Come sit next to me. Let's be friends." Those words froze Snow White's blood. They were the same ones that her stepmother had told her a long time ago. The queen, understanding her mistake and seeing the girl's reaction, quickly changed her strategy. "Come, darling, don't be afraid of this ugly wrinkled old woman. It's almost lunchtime. She shares this apple with me. Do me that favor. I'll be happy if you do this." A suspicious Snow White sat next to her, and when she saw that the old woman cut the apple in two and she ate half, she understood that there could be nothing wrong with that half of the fruit that the old lady offered her with such affection. Snow White's was a terrible mistake because the half that the queen was eating was the clean half and she offered the poisoned half to the girl. She was to bite into the apple and swallow the bit that she had bitten off, and she fell dead to the ground. The queen, seeing that her plan had worked, took the knife with which she had cut the apple, and she herself would take the girl's heart to make sure that this time there would be no way for her to be saved. But the sound of the miners returning from her work caused her to flee in terror before she was seen and could be associated with Snow White's death. She watched the little men run anguished to the girl's body and heard how they said and lamented about Snow White's death. Her cries corroborated that this time she was dead, and dead. She had finally gotten rid of her. She returned to the palace exhausted from the walk, panting and wanting to shake off that horrible image of old age and ugliness of her. She took the potion and, writhing in pain, she recovered her figure and beauty. She spent several days in bed. Those transformations left her without strength and her body suffered tremendously. Her bones ached, her hair fell out and her nails broke easily. she had to regain her strength and health to continue being young and beautiful. When she felt recovered, she approached the mirror, and asking her, she got the answer she was looking for. She was still the most beautiful in the kingdom. Snow White had died. In the little house in the forest, the little men mourned the loss of their beloved daughter. She had brought joy to their simple and hard-working lives. They regretted not having been able to take better care of her, and seeing that her countenance was still beautiful, they decided to make her a glass urn and leave it in a small clearing in the woods near a stream, because it hurt even to bury their beloved Snow White. It happened that in those days a prince with his entourage was around the lands of the miners, and on a walk the prince found that beautiful coffin with Snow White inside. It seemed to him something so unusual, and the beauty of the girl dazzled him in such a way that he wanted to take the coffin to his palace, so that everyone could see such a marvel found in the miners' forest. The soldiers and companions came, and all of them, astonished by such a discovery, lifted the urn with great care, but lo and behold, one of the soldiers accidentally slipped on the wet grass and the urn rolled on the ground, throwing Snow White's body a little further, and in the jolt the girl spat out the piece of poisoned apple that had gotten stuck in her throat, and in this way she breathed again with relief. Snow White woke up startled and thanked her savior for bringing her back to life. She told him what happened, and the prince took her to her castle to live there. Everyone in the castle marveled at Snow White's story, and soon the prince announced his marriage to the girl. They took the 7 little men to the palace to be Snow White's personal guards, and organized a big banquet on the wedding day, to which they invited all the kings and queens of the neighboring countries. Of course, the stepmother was also invited, and once she had recovered from her last and most terrible adventure in the little house in the woods, she was beautiful and young again. She talked to the dressmakers and tailors of her court so that they could make her a dress that would make her look that slender and wonderful body that she had again. The hairdressers gave her an incredible hairstyle, and the creams and potions made her look really beautiful. On the wedding day she arrived at the castle, and all the guests turned to admire her. Her exclamations of admiration and respect for such an elegant and beautiful lady multiplied. There were so many people that the stepmother was left in the crowd at the wedding ceremony, but she could clearly observe everyone and everything. When she saw Snow White dressed as a bride, she almost fainted from fright. That girl had more lives than a cat. How was it possible? Who was still alive? How come he was there competing with her in beauty? How the hell had she met the prince, and even worse, how could she become queen? A fatal afternoon passed. Everyone's eyes had turned to Snow White, leaving her in the background. Anger, resentment, envy began to sprout again in the queen's heart, and she searched for a way in her mind to finish once and for all with that dragged Snow White. Full of hate, she looked at her stepdaughter, and when she began to push out of the great palace room, her stepdaughter managed to see her and, scared, she told her already husband. Immediately the prince called his guards, and in order not to make a scandal they let the stepmother out, and once she had mounted her carriage and moved a little away from the palace, they seized her and put her in a dungeon waiting to be tried and sentenced for her horrible crimes. And nonsense. Nothing more was heard of her in her kingdom. Snow White returned with her prince, and now they were king and queen to the great joy of all. The mirror room was sealed forever. The little men were the personal guardians of the new queen and the caretakers and spoilers of the children they had. As for the evil queen, never heard from her again. Some comment that they put enchanted iron shoes on her that forced her to dance and spin around and around without stopping. Others said that they had locked her in a room full of mirrors where she was constantly reflected, and without her potions and drinks she looked uglier and older every day. The truth is that she was locked in a dark cell in the palace, and there she spent her days. Without her creams, ointments and various potions, he aged just like anyone else. The transformations he had undergone to kill his stepdaughter took their toll on him, and his hair fell out in heaps and his bones limp. And they hurt continuously. And so the story of Snow White ends. They say that the castle still exists, and that the mirror room has not yet been opened. Someday they'll open it. Let's hope it's not some evil queen asking her, "Wonderful mirror, mirror, who is the most beautiful woman in this kingdom?"